The Zavarian Empire had ruled the stars for centuries, their power unmatched. Their warriors were ruthless, their technology advanced, and their arrogance limitless. But against all odds, humanity had resisted. The Terran Federation was smaller, weaker in numbers, yet they had held the line. After years of war, both sides had finally agreed to peace talks. Princess Valera Zirex, the heir to the Zavarian throne, was chosen to represent her people. She arrived at the negotiation hall, her head held high, her silver-blue robes flowing like liquid metal. Her violet eyes scanned the room, expecting to see aged diplomats and officials, men who could be manipulated. But instead, she saw him. A human soldier stood at the other end of the long table, arms crossed, his sharp gaze fixed on her. He wasn't dressed in the formal attire of a politician. He wore a Terran military uniform, dark and simple, with no excessive decoration, only the insignia of his rank. Commander Dorian Kane. Valera's lips pressed together in a thin line. A soldier? This was an insult. The Terrans had sent a warrior instead of a diplomat. Dorian, on the other hand, remained calm. He had been in countless battles, seen horrors Valera could never imagine. To him, she was just another Zavarian noble, someone used to power, someone who expected others to kneel. But humans didn't kneel easily. The room was silent as both leaders sized each other up. The tension was thick. The diplomats seated around the table exchanged nervous glances. Valera spoke first, her voice smooth but firm. "I expected to speak with someone who understands diplomacy." Dorian smirked slightly. "I expected to negotiate with someone who understands reality." A flicker of irritation passed through her eyes, but she quickly masked it. She was trained for this. She would not let a mere human rattle her. "I assume you are here to represent your government," she said coolly. Dorian nodded. "I am here to make sure humanity gets a fair deal. No tricks, no deception." Valera let out a soft laugh. "You think the Zavarian Empire needs tricks to win?" Dorian leaned forward slightly. "I think you wouldn't be here if you had already won." The words hung in the air like a blade. Valera's confidence faltered for just a second. He was right. If the Empire had truly crushed the Terrans, there would be no need for peace talks. She took a deep breath, regaining her composure. "Then let us begin. But understand this, Commander. I will not be intimidated." Dorian met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Neither will I." The negotiations had just begun. But one thing was clear. This was not going to be easy. Princess Valera Zirex was not used to feeling uncertain. She had spent her life among Zavarian nobles, trained to control her emotions, to be the perfect ruler. Yet, as she sat across from Commander Dorian Kane, something about him unsettled her. He was different from the diplomats she usually dealt with. Most of them bowed, eager to please the Empire. But this human soldier, he didn't seem afraid. He didn't lower his eyes or choose his words carefully. Instead, he spoke directly, with confidence that made her uncomfortable. The negotiations began, but they quickly turned into a battle of words. "The Zavarian Empire is offering peace, Commander Kane. Your people should be grateful," Valera said smoothly, keeping her tone regal. Dorian leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "Peace. That's an interesting word for a treaty that leaves humans with nothing." A flicker of irritation crossed her face. He had seen through the Empire's offer too easily. Zavarians were used to dominating weaker races, giving them peace in exchange for total control. But humans were different. They didn't accept defeat so easily. "You misunderstand, Commander," she said, keeping her voice calm. "This treaty ensures stability in the galaxy. Your people will have protection under the Empire." Dorian let out a dry chuckle. "Protection. More like control. Let's be honest, Princess. If your empire truly wanted peace, it wouldn't have taken this long to reach the table." Valera's fingers twitched. He was right, and she knew it. The only reason the Zavarian emperor agreed to peace talks was because humans had survived longer than expected. The war had dragged on, and the empire had underestimated them. She studied Dorian carefully. His face was sharp, his expression unreadable. His eyes, however, told a different story. He wasn't just here as a soldier. He was here because he had seen war firsthand. He had fought, bled, and lost people he cared about. For a moment, she felt something strange. Guilt? No, that was impossible. The Zavarian Empire was superior. That was what she had been taught all her life. So why did this human make her question that? Dorian suddenly spoke, breaking her thoughts. "You know what I don't get," he said, tilting his head. "If your people are so much more advanced than us, why are you sitting here, negotiating with me?" Valera's breath caught for just a second. She recovered quickly, but the damage was done. He had struck a nerve. She lifted her chin. "Because we value peace." Dorian smirked. "No, you value survival." Silence. For the first time, Valera felt trapped in a conversation. Dorian Kane was not a fool. He was not someone she could manipulate easily. And that made him dangerous. Princess Valera Zirex sat still, her face calm, but inside, she was irritated. This human, Commander Dorian Kane, was proving to be more difficult than she expected. He did not bow, did not show fear, and most of all, he did not accept the Empire's dominance. She had met many leaders from weaker species before. They always respected Zavarian power. But humans? They were different. Dorian leaned forward slightly. "So, tell me, Princess, why should humanity accept your treaty? What exactly do we gain from it?" Valera smiled politely. "You gain security. The war will end. No more destruction, no more loss of life. The Zavarian Empire will ensure stability." Dorian chuckled. "Security? You mean submission." Her fingers twitched under the table. He saw through her words too easily. "The Empire does not conquer," she said smoothly. "We guide." Dorian's expression didn't change. "And yet, every planet you guide loses its freedom." Valera resisted the urge to sigh. This man was impossible. Why did humans refuse to accept their place? She decided to test him. If she could not intimidate him, perhaps she could manipulate him. "Tell me, Commander," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Why do humans fight so hard? Your people are smaller in number, your technology is weaker, and yet you still resist. Why?" Dorian's eyes darkened. "Because we don't kneel. We don't let others decide our fate." His voice was firm, unshaken. For the first time, Valera felt something strange, a flicker of respect. He continued, "You think we're weak because we don't have an empire like yours. But humans have something you don't." Valera raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" Dorian smiled slightly. "The will to fight, even when the odds are against us." She didn't have a response to that. For a moment, she simply looked at him, truly seeing him. He was not just a soldier. He was a survivor. Then, an idea formed in her mind. A dangerous idea. She leaned forward. "Perhaps, then, we should test that strength." Dorian narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Valera's voice was calm, but there was a challenge in her tone. "A proposal. A duel between us. One that will prove if humanity deserves to stand as equals." Dorian smirked. "You want to fight me, Princess." She met his gaze, refusing to back down. "If you win, I will reconsider the terms of the treaty. But if I win, humanity must accept our rule." The room fell silent. The diplomats around them looked shocked. Dorian's smirk widened. "You're either very confident or very desperate." Valera's heart pounded. She had just made a dangerous move. And she had no intention of losing. The room was silent after Valera's proposal. Everyone's eyes were on her and Commander Dorian Kane, waiting for one of them to speak. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it might crack. Valera's words had been bold, and though she had expected a reaction, she hadn't quite prepared for Dorian's calm response. "You really think a duel will settle this?" he asked, his voice steady. His eyes never left hers, his gaze unflinching. Valera sat tall, her posture proud, as she met his stare. "You speak of strength and will, Commander. Let us see if your humanity can match Zavarian skill." She barely suppressed the urge to smile. The challenge was set, and now she could prove her superiority. Dorian didn't flinch, but there was a spark of something in his eyes. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe just the thrill of a fight. "Fine. A duel. But don't think for a second that it'll be easy for you." Valera nodded, but her mind was already working. The Zavarian warriors were trained in combat from a young age. Their agility, strength, and advanced technology made them nearly unbeatable. She had faced the strongest in the Empire and emerged victorious every time. This human had no idea what he was up against, but there was something about Dorian that kept gnawing at her thoughts. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't arrogant or impulsive. There was an inner strength to him that made her wonder just how much he could endure. The duel would take place in the Empire's training arena, a vast, high-tech space designed for combat. Valera stood as the chosen champion for her people, and Dorian represented the Terran Federation. No one could interfere, and the outcome would determine the fate of the peace talks. As they walked to the arena, Valera could feel her heart rate picking up, though she kept her face composed. Dorian wasn't the type to give up easily. He had survived countless battles, and though he was only human, his will to survive had been proven time and time again. The arena doors slid open with a sharp hiss, and the bright lights of the space illuminated the floor. The crowd of diplomats and soldiers gathered in the stands, their whispers fading as Valera and Dorian took their places at opposite ends of the arena. Valera didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful. Her Zavarian combat suit adapted instantly to her body, enhancing her natural abilities with a series of powerful energy shields and advanced weaponry. She drew her energy blade, the glowing weapon humming in her hand. Dorian stood tall across from her, his stance calm, his body alert. He didn't have the luxury of advanced technology. His uniform was simple, but there was something in the way he held himself that spoke of a long history of hard-earned battle experience. Valera's eyes narrowed. This would be easy. "Ready?" Dorian called, his voice cool. Valera didn't answer. She charged forward, her blade raised. But just as she was about to strike, Dorian moved, his speed surprising her. He sidestepped the attack and countered with a move of his own, a quick jab aimed at her side. For the first time, Valera's breath caught. She dodged just in time, but Dorian had come much closer than she had expected. He wasn't just skilled, he was clever. The duel had only just begun, but already Valera could feel the weight of the challenge ahead. This wasn't going to be as simple as she had thought. The duel between Princess Valera Orcs and Commander Dorian Kane was not what anyone had expected. The arena buzzed with anticipation, the crowd on the edge of their seats. Valera moved with lightning speed, her energy blade flashing in the bright lights. Dorian, however, was proving to be far more skilled than she had initially thought. She had charged at him, expecting an easy victory, but Dorian had danced around her strikes, his movements fluid and precise. He wasn't just reacting to her attacks, he was anticipating them, his body reading every move, every shift of her weight. Valera's heart pounded. She had faced some of the finest warriors in the Zavarian Empire, but this human soldier was different. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Her blade was raised high, but Dorian didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward with an almost casual ease, deflecting her strike with a sharp twist of his wrist. In that instant, Valera felt a strange, unfamiliar feeling, the sting of doubt. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Before she could recover, the ground beneath them rumbled. The arena's lights flickered, casting eerie shadows over the two combatants. Suddenly, there was a sharp crash from the side of the arena, followed by a series of loud explosions that shook the entire structure. Valera's head snapped toward the source of the noise. A group of masked assailants stormed into the arena, weapons drawn and eyes wild with fury. They weren't Terran soldiers. No, they were rogue Xaverian loyalists, enemies of the peace talks, who saw the human commander as a threat to the Empire's power. They had planned to attack her, but had instead targeted the wrong person. In their anger, they had made a grave mistake. Valera's eyes blazed with fury as the assassins charged toward her, but before she could react, Dorian was already moving. He was faster than she had imagined, his instincts honed from years of battle. He leaped into action, grabbing her arm and pulling her out of the way just as a blast from a plasma gun exploded where she had been standing. "Stay close," he shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. There was no time for questions. Valera's heart raced as Dorian pulled her behind a nearby pillar. The rogue Xaverians were advancing quickly, their eyes locked on the human, who they now considered their enemy. But Dorian was no ordinary human soldier. He was a force to be reckoned with. Without hesitation, he unsheathed a bladed weapon, his eyes steely with determination. He had seen enough battles to know what was at stake. His hands gripped the weapon tightly, and he stepped forward with the confidence of a man who knew his life was on the line. The assassins hesitated for a split second, surprised by his swift reaction. It was enough for Dorian to close the distance between them. He was a blur of motion. His strikes were precise, his footwork flawless. He dispatched the first attacker with a swift, calculated strike, knocking the assailant to the ground in seconds. Valera watched in shock. She had never seen a human move like this. Dorian was outmatching them, and her surprise quickly turned to admiration. But just as the last of the attackers fell, another explosion rattled the arena. A second wave of assailants, far more heavily armed, emerged from the shadows. The situation was becoming more dangerous by the second. Dorian turned to Valera, his face set in a hard line. "Get to safety. I'll hold them off." She hesitated, but there was no time for doubt. Valera nodded, her mind racing. She had no choice but to trust him. In the heat of the battle, she realized this human soldier was her ally, and perhaps for the first time, she wasn't so sure that her people were the superior ones. As she ran toward the exit, she knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. The future of the peace talks, and the fate of both their people, was at stake. The arena was chaos. The echoes of explosions and gunfire rang in the air as Princess Valera Xerex sprinted through the corridors, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind her, the sounds of battle continued. Commander Dorian Kane was holding his ground, but Valera knew it wouldn't be long before more attackers arrived. Her breath came in sharp bursts as she rounded a corner, her mind racing. The rogue Xaverian assassins had disrupted everything. The peace talks, the duel, and the fragile truce they had hoped to build were all now hanging by a thread. As she ran, a strange realization washed over her. She wasn't scared, not like she should have been. The fear that had been with her moments before had been replaced by something else, something she couldn't name. She paused briefly at an intersection, glancing over her shoulder. The sound of footsteps was growing closer. She had to move. She had no choice. Suddenly, a voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. "Princess." Valera turned quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for her blade. It was Dorian, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, but his eyes were still as focused as ever. He was bleeding from a wound on his arm, but he didn't seem to notice it. "Come on," he said, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her forward. "We don't have much time. The next wave is already on its way." For a moment, Valera hesitated. Her duty to her people weighed heavily on her. She was their princess. She couldn't just run away. But when she looked into Dorian's eyes, she knew he was right. They needed to escape. Dorian led her through the dark, twisting corridors of the arena. The sounds of battle grew more distant, but the urgency didn't fade. They finally reached a small, hidden door at the far end of the building. Dorian paused just long enough to check the surrounding area before pushing the door open. "After you," he said, his voice low but steady. Valera stepped through, her mind spinning. What had just happened? The assassination attempt, the unexpected betrayal, and now, fleeing for their lives. She never thought she would be in this situation. But here she was, running with the one person she had been taught to despise. But something had changed. Dorian had saved her life. He had thrown himself into danger without hesitation, without concern for his own safety, and he had fought with a skill that was beyond what she could have ever imagined from a human. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice more urgent now. "To the Terran ship," Dorian replied, glancing over his shoulder. "It's the safest place for now. The Zavarian loyalists won't dare to follow us there." Valera nodded, though a knot of uncertainty twisted in her stomach. She had spent her life knowing the Zavarian Empire was invincible, that nothing could challenge its rule. Yet here she was, running, trusting this human soldier to keep her safe. As they moved swiftly through the corridors, the weight of the situation pressed down on her. The peace talks were in ruins, and a new threat was rising. The Zavarian Empire was fractured, and the Terran Federation was growing stronger with each passing day. She was not blind to the truth. She had always thought of humanity as weak, as something to be controlled. But now, as she followed Dorian, she couldn't help but rethink everything. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Dorian didn't look at her, but his voice was calm and steady. "Because we're not enemies, Princess. Not anymore." The words struck her deeply. For a moment, she wasn't sure if it was the sound of his voice or the weight of the truth in them, but for the first time in years, Valera felt something unfamiliar stir inside her, a glimmer of hope. The Terran warship was unlike anything Valera had ever seen. The ship's walls were lined with sleek, functional designs, no ornate decorations or displays of power, just simple, effective engineering. It felt alive, like a creature built for survival, not for show. As they entered the ship, Valera glanced at Commander Dorian Kane. His expression was calm, but she could see the tension in his jaw. He had fought off an entire group of Zavarian assassins and still had the presence of mind to protect her. Yet, as soon as they were inside the warship's secure corridors, something shifted in his demeanor. "We'll be safe here," Dorian said, his voice low but steady. He turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "For now." Valera nodded, though her mind was swirling with questions. She had never been forced to run like this, never been in a position where her life, the future of the Empire, was in another's hands. "Why are they after me?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Her gaze fell to the floor, her thoughts racing. The assassination attempt. It wasn't just a random act, was it? Dorian didn't speak immediately. He led her into a small, secure room and shut the door behind them, the soft hum of the ship's engines in the background. He turned to face her, his face serious. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "It wasn't random." Valera felt a knot form in her stomach. "Then what's going on? Why would Zavarian loyalists want to kill me? You're the one they should be focused on, not me." Dorian took a deep breath. "There's more to this than just the peace talks." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "The truth is, some factions in the Empire don't want peace. They believe that your father is weak, that you are weak for even considering it. They think that making peace with humanity would be a betrayal of everything the Empire stands for." Valera's eyes widened. She had always known there were dissenters within the Empire, but she had never imagined they would go this far. These were not just rebels fighting for power. They were willing to kill, willing to destroy the future of the Empire, all to maintain a war they believed in. "So they want to prevent the peace talks?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "But why kill me?" Dorian looked at her, his gaze unwavering. Because you're the symbol of that peace. If they kill you, they can send a message to your father and to everyone else. Peace is not an option. It's not just the talks they want to destroy. It's the idea of unity between Xaverians and humans. Valera felt a chill run down her spine. She had been so focused on the diplomatic side of things, so sure that the talks were just about political power and who would rule. But this was something deeper. It was about control, about whether the Empire would continue to rule through fear and war, or whether humanity would be allowed to live in peace alongside them. "What are we going to do?" Valera asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Dorian looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "We fight back. We don't let them win. If we want peace, we have to show them it's possible, that it's stronger than their hatred. But we'll need to move fast. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the future of both our people." For the first time since the attack, Valera felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this human soldier, who she had once viewed with contempt, was right. Together, they could change the course of the future. But she knew this wouldn't be easy. The battle had just begun. The tension aboard the Terran warship was unbearable. The hum of the engines felt almost like a heartbeat, pulsing through the air. Princess Valera Xerex stood by the window, staring out into the dark void of space, her thoughts racing. The rogue Xaverian faction was not done yet. They had tried to kill her, and now they were after the peace talks, and the entire future of both the Xaverian Empire and the Terran Federation. Dorian stood beside her, his face set in a determined expression. "We've received new intel. They're planning another attack on the Xaverian Emperor." His voice was calm but urgent. "If we don't act fast, your father will be the next target." Valera turned toward him, her heart pounding. "How do you know?" Dorian didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled up a holographic map on his wrist device, showing the location of Xaverian military strongholds and the latest data from their spies. "They have a plan to strike while the Emperor is vulnerable," Dorian continued, pointing at the coordinates on the map. "It's a coordinated attack. We have to move now, or it will be too late." Valera's mind raced. Her father, the Emperor, was the most powerful being in the galaxy. The thought of someone, especially a traitor within their own ranks, trying to assassinate him was unthinkable. She knew she had to act, but there was a dangerous question hanging over her. "Can we really trust the Terran forces to help us?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with doubt. Dorian looked at her, his eyes serious. "You don't have a choice. We either work together, or the Empire falls into chaos. And as much as it pains me to say this, the Emperor's life may be the only way to stop this war once and for all." Valera closed her eyes for a moment. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The Xaverian Empire had always ruled alone, proud and unyielding. But in this moment, they were in no position to fight the rogue factions alone. She needed help, and Dorian Kane was the one who had proven time and time again that he was trustworthy. She nodded, feeling a weight settle on her shoulders. "Then let's move. We'll need to warn my father." Dorian didn't hesitate. He activated his comms and began issuing orders to his Terran team. Valera watched as the soldiers quickly mobilized, ready to leave the ship and assist in a covert rescue mission. The countdown had begun. As the Terran soldiers prepared to leave, Dorian turned back to Valera. "Stay here. It's too dangerous for you to go. We'll handle this." "No," she said firmly, shaking her head. "I'm not staying behind. This is my responsibility." Dorian's eyes softened for a moment, but his tone remained firm. "It's not just about you, Valera. If the Emperor falls, so does the Empire. We need to get to him before they do. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that they'll strike first." For a second, Valera felt a strange sense of understanding between them. She wasn't just Princess Valera Xerex of the Empire anymore. She was fighting for her people, for humanity, and for the peace that now seemed more fragile than ever. She straightened up, her resolve hardening. "Then let's go. I won't let them destroy everything I've worked for." Dorian nodded, acknowledging her strength. Without another word, they left the safe room and headed for the ship's docking bay, where a small team of loyal Xaverian soldiers was waiting. Their task was clear: protect the Emperor and stop the traitors who wanted to rip the galaxy apart. As they boarded the ship that would take them to the Xaverian capital, Valera's mind was focused on one thing: protecting her father and ensuring that the fragile peace they had started could still be saved. It was a race against time, but with Dorian by her side, she felt for the first time that victory was possible. The Xaverian capital loomed ahead, a magnificent city built on towering cliffs, its gleaming spires reaching up to the stars. Yet, for all its beauty, the city was filled with tension. Princess Valera Xerex could feel it in the air as she and Commander Dorian Kane made their way through the city's hidden passageways. The quiet was eerie, a stark contrast to the chaos of the recent attacks. Dorian walked beside her, his face grim. He didn't need to say anything. His presence spoke volumes. He was here for one reason: to ensure her safety and the safety of the Xaverian Emperor. Valera couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The peace talks, the life of her father, the future of the Empire. It was all resting on what happened next. She had been raised to believe that the Xaverian Empire was invincible, that no one could challenge their power. But everything had changed in the span of just a few days. "You think we're going to make it in time?" she asked Dorian, her voice a little softer than usual. Dorian's eyes never wavered from the path ahead. "We have to. If we don't stop this, the entire galaxy could fall into chaos. The Emperor is the key. If we can keep him alive, we can stop the rogue factions from getting the power they want." Valera nodded, but doubt lingered in her mind. She had spent her entire life thinking her people were above all others, that they were destined to rule. But now she was beginning to question everything she had been taught. The more time she spent with Dorian, the more she realized that humanity had its own strength, a strength born not from power or fear, but from the will to survive. "We're almost there," Dorian said, interrupting her thoughts. His voice was low but steady, his eyes scanning the surroundings. They arrived at the hidden entrance to the Imperial Palace. The guards had been dealt with, and the way was clear. Dorian signaled for Valera to follow him, and they slipped inside the massive structure. The grand hallways were silent, the light from distant lamps casting long shadows on the polished floors. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The palace was nearly deserted, with most of the loyal guards stationed at key locations to protect the Emperor. But they had to get to him before it was too late. As they reached the Emperor's chambers, Valera's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't help but think of everything she had learned in the past days. The hidden truths, the way her people had always seen themselves as superior, the way they had crushed anyone who dared to challenge them. Had it all been a lie? But as she pushed open the doors to her father's private quarters, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let her empire fall into the hands of those who wanted nothing but destruction. The Emperor was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned when he heard the door open, his expression unreadable. "Father," Valera said, her voice a mix of relief and determination. "There's a threat against your life. We need to leave now." The Emperor's eyes softened as he regarded his daughter. "I knew something was wrong, but you've come to protect me. Thank you." Valera felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just a princess. She was fighting for the future of her people, and for a chance to create something better. The Emperor nodded to Dorian, a silent acknowledgement of his role in this mission. "I see you found a worthy ally, Valera. Perhaps humanity isn't as weak as I thought." Dorian gave a respectful bow. "We're here to protect you, Your Majesty." Together, they turned toward the exit, ready to face whatever came next. For Valera, the future no longer seemed so certain, but it was hers to shape. The Empire, and the peace she had once thought impossible were within reach. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could find a way to live in unity, where power wasn't defined by who controlled the stars, but by the strength of the hearts that guided them. The Xaverian capital was in chaos. The rogue factions had attempted their coup, and the imperial palace was under lockdown. But for Princess Valera Xerex, there was a sense of resolve now. She had come a long way from the royal daughter, who once believed the Xaverian Empire was invincible. Now, standing in the middle of the chaos, she knew the truth. Peace was worth fighting for, and she was willing to risk everything for it. The Xaverian Emperor had been safely relocated to a secure location, thanks to the efforts of Commander Dorian Kane and the loyal Terran forces. But the battle was far from over. The rogue factions were still out there, and their plans for rebellion had not been fully stopped. Dorian stood beside Valera, his expression stoic as they surveyed the damage. "It's not over yet," he said, his voice low but determined. "We have to make sure the peace talks continue, no matter what happens." Valera nodded, her eyes scanning the palace courtyard where Xaverian soldiers and Terran forces worked together to clean up the mess left behind. For the first time, she didn't feel the usual weight of royal privilege. She wasn't just standing there, watching her soldiers do the work. She was right in the heart of it, fighting for something bigger than herself. "What happens now?" Valera asked, her voice softer than usual as she turned to Dorian. He glanced at her, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a glimmer of respect. "We move forward. Together." Her heart skipped a beat. Together. That was a word she never imagined would apply to her relationship with a human soldier. "You're not like the others," Valera said, her voice steady, but filled with something deeper now. It wasn't just gratitude for saving her life or helping her father. It was something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for so long. Admiration. Dorian smiled faintly. "Neither are you." For a moment, neither of them said anything. There were no grand speeches, no declarations of war or peace, just a simple understanding. They had both been changed in ways they hadn't expected. "I don't know what the future holds," Valera said finally, looking out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set. "But I do know one thing, it won't be like the past." Dorian stood beside her, his posture strong but relaxed. "I can't promise everything will be easy, but we'll face it together, humans and Xaverians." Valera turned toward him, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future still hanging in the air. But now, there was something new, a sense of possibility. For the first time, humanity and Xaverian forces were not at odds. They were united in a common goal. "Thank you, Dorian," Valera said quietly, her voice sincere. "You've shown me something I never thought possible." Dorian met her gaze, his eyes serious but warm. "The world is full of surprises, Princess. It's time to make the most of them." The two stood there for a long moment, the sky above them turning darker as the stars began to appear. The peace talks would continue, and despite the challenges ahead, there was a new hope rising, one born from unity, trust, and a shared will to survive. Together, they had faced the darkness. Now, they would walk toward the light. The future, uncertain as it was, held a new promise. And for Valera and Dorian, it was a future they would build together.